Right, it is 5 p.m. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Like the nice lady just told us, this is being recorded as well as live streamed on YouTube. And please use the raise hand feature so we can get everybody's voices heard. And Sean, please.
Thank you, Kim. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 5 o'clock on the hour, February 14th. It's also Valentine's Day. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate everyone being here and continued participation, and any community members who may be turning in. I would like to do our centering exercise. I'd like to invite you to join me in our centering conversations tonight. First, I will read a statement, then I will ask you to join me in a breathing exercise to help bring focus and thoughtfulness to our conversations today. Today, we convene to listen and learn from each other through reflection and discussion. As we reevaluate and improve our public safety practices, we elevate the voices and experience of the communities who have been and continue to be disproportionately impacted by inequitable systems. We thank all those who have advocated and worked on dismantling injustices in Tigard and our broader community. We build off their efforts to create more equitable and just outcomes for people of all backgrounds and abilities. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to develop our understanding of current public safety, structure, practice, and procedures, identify and eliminate institutional racism within Tigard's public institutions by centering equity and racial justice, bring forward the concerns and experiences of ourselves and our community, bring recommendations to city leadership to improve the lived experiences of all people in Tigard. Now we will do a breathing exercise together. You turn off your camera for this portion. Close your eyes and gaze softly downward. Feel the chair under your legs. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out your mouth. Feel your hands in your lap. Breathing deeply through your nose and out your mouth. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe in deeply through your nose and out your mouth. Slowly open your eyes and begin to breathe normally. Thank you all for participating and creating space with me. You can turn your monitors back on, your cameras back on. And now I'll turn it over to Kim for roll call.
Thank you, Sean. Commander McDonald.
Here.
Officer Nunn.
Here.
Shelby Rahala.
Here.
Michael O'Brien. Elise Butera. Emilio Calderon.
Here.
Liz Newton.
Here.
John Trin.
Here.
Jimmy Brown.
Here.
Lee Landers. Patty Lofgren. Justin Lowe.
Here.
Annie Rauda.
Here.
Valerie Sasaki.
Here.
Sean Stoldryer.
Here.
Nick Jarmer.
Here, thank you.
And Jeff Mott. That is roll, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Now I would like to open up our meeting for public comment. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, but I do not think anybody provided public comment today.
No, there was no public comment.
Thank you. Tonight, no community members have joined us to speak. Public comments are vital to the board's mission, and we welcome community feedback on our work. If you have comments for the board, written testimony needs to be submitted by 4:30 p.m. the day of our scheduled meeting. If you would like to speak at our meeting, please email our staff at the email address presented on the screen. And I trust that's on the screen. I can't actually see it.
It is now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. With that, I will turn the floor over to the chief for our update, including the findings and recommendations. It's all yours, Chief.
Thanks, Sean, and good evening, everybody. I just wanted to give you a little bit of feedback from the last two meetings dialogue, especially when we were on the complaint process, and just letting you know that not everything rises to the level of a recommendation, but there are often the comments that you all provide or the robust discussions that we have that I really take to heart and hear what your intentions are and try and implement it. And the example I wanted to share with you, I think Mick would like to roll back his verbiage that he used as far as on complaints on whether or not somebody who calls in articulates what policy they violated. And I know that wasn't his intent, but it garnered a bunch of robust conversations. But we have a management meeting once a month, and that is all the sergeants, lieutenants, commanders, and myself, and a few other non-sworn managers. And it was my opportunity to go over, again, my expectation on complaints, but also how I want us to intake complaints. And it really is about thoughtfully listening. It's not there to solve or dispute anything, but to active listen, to take things in, to seek clarification, and then to let the process go along. So I really just wanted to give you feedback that while you didn't identify a quote unquote policy change, I really heard some robust feedback on just, the culture, the intention of how we want to be inclusive when we hear those complaints, and wanted to follow up with you to just say, we had the robust discussion, there was some dialogue, and it was a good, timely conversation. So I wanted to give that feedback to all of you. And that's really all I had at that point.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Now I'd like to invite Commander McDonald to answer some questions received since the last meeting.
Sean, actually, before we go to the commander, I think Valerie had a question for the chief.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Since the legislature is in session, I was just wondering if you're aware of anything that would be, anything before the legislature right now that would be related to the work of this group.
The biggest discussion right now is, it was before, in the previous session, House Bill 2002. And Justin, speak up if you have any, that died, it didn't go any further. And it was thrown in everything but the kitchen soup regarding police reform. A portion of it has been moved forward this session. And really the biggest thing that we in Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police and Sheriffs is following is making traffic lighting a secondary offense, which both associations are opposed and try to work some things out. But I think that's a track right now is if a tail light was broken out, that wouldn't be your primary stop. You'd have to have some similar to what seatbelt violations were initially when they rolled out. It had to be something else besides just a seatbelt violation. That would be the same with lighting. It tried to get traction last time, and then Portland ended up just doing it on their own. But that is going through legislation right now. The other is seeking clarification from last legislative session on riots and terminology and on different munitions and gases and stuff like that. And we're just a lot of wordsmithing and trying to seek for clarification. And that's probably the biggest other bill that we're tracking.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Valerie. Does anybody else have any other questions for the chief before we move on?
I don't see any hands, Sean.
Okay. All right. Now, Commander McDonald, I'll turn it over to you to answer some questions that have come up.
Sure. Yeah, Jimmy sent in a couple of questions that were out of the contract, and specifically under a couple of the definitions. So in Article 27.1 and Article 27.2 out of the TPOA contract, it talks about 27.1 talks about oral reprimands not being considered discipline. So for a point of clarification, an oral reprimand could be a variety of different things. Generally, those are going to be low bar policy violations. Let's say my uniform wasn't in appropriate order, right? I actually gave an oral reprimand a month and a half or so ago to an officer for not having the correct uniform in order. So if I did that 2 or 3 times, that would be considered progressive discipline. And you could end up getting a disciplinary sanction for that. So the question that Jimmy had was what occurs if an officer repeats or receives multiple oral reprimands? I think the important thing to recognize here is that oral reprimands are actually documented. we actually write it down because nobody remembers what you said 6 months later when the same thing happens. And then 6 months later, when the same thing happens again, or they have a different supervisor at that point. So we document those things so that even though it's an oral reprimand, it is what we call documented verbal counseling, right? So it would become progressive discipline in short. It ultimately, you end up with 3 or 4 of the same thing. You're going to end up with actual discipline, right? So that's what it is. It leads to progressive discipline, or it starts into progressive discipline. It could get worse. I mean, if you just continue to refuse to, I don't know, if you decide you're going to keep wearing tennis shoes and you don't have a note from your doctor that allows you to wear tennis shoes, and the policy says you're supposed to wear, black colored boots, and you continue to do that, and you don't have permission from the chief or a doctor's note to say you can wear otherwise, I suppose it could go all the way up to termination if you're going to be that adamant about it. But that's how progressive discipline works. So that's how that would happen. And I'm happy to report that we very rarely see someone have a similar type of disciplinary action. It's very rare. So these oral reprimands or documented verbal counseling, as we generally refer to them, are very effective. So we rarely see a repeat offense. And then the next one that Jimmy asked about, the definition says, the question is if the city has reason to discipline an employee, it will take all reasonable measures to assure against embarrassment of the employee before other employees or the public. And the question that Jimmy had was, does this mean there is no public acknowledgement of discipline? And does discipline information get forwarded to DPSST as a matter of policy, either local or statewide policy? So let me answer the first question first. Generally speaking, disciplinary action is something that is not released to the public, and partially because of employee rights. And not being a labor attorney, I couldn't possibly begin to speak to all of the nuances of that. But generally speaking, most disciplinary actions are not going to be released to the public. However, misconduct is something that if we take disciplinary action, meaning something that results in an economic sanction, it's now something that has to be reported to DPSST. So it's reported to the state certifying body, which then can evaluate that misconduct as a course potentially to have implications for their statewide certification. So yes, some cases of discipline, if it's misconduct, will get reported to the state. And I hope that answers the questions that you had about that stuff there, Jimmy, because it does, I will say this, a lot of our complaints get generated internally. And I will say this, the instances or the percentage of complaints that we sustain for a policy violation that are generated internally are much higher percentage than those that come from the outside. So when we're holding ourselves accountable, we're sustaining those types of incidents at a much greater rate. And I will say this, that of the reportable incidents, at least in my memory, I don't know that I can think of one was reported to the state that wasn't generated internally. It was something that we discovered and that we investigated, and then it was something that was reported to the state. Chief, I don't know if you can think of anything. I mean, it's rare that we have those instances, but they're almost always internally generated, it seems like.
Yeah, I think the one that probably comes to mind is if an officer gets a DUI and they're arrested, right? And then we're notified. I guess that's technically an internal one, but it's as a result of an arrest that happens. And that has happened during my tenure here. And, that officer was let go. And so that it does happen.
Yeah. So anyway, does that, Jimmy, does that answer the questions that you sent in, the couple questions that you had?
Yes, and I appreciate that. It does kind of jumpstart me into another question, and I don't know if you need to answer it here or what, but relative to whether it be internal discipline or complaints that come from an external source, what do the numbers, if any, for Tigard look like as it relates to employees of the department being let go as a result of that discipline, or I guess, as you said, misconduct?
So like what percentage of those complaints result in termination?
Yeah, that would be part of it. But at the same time, what percentage of our workforce has been terminated as a result of misconduct or disciplinary procedures that lead to termination?
Oh my gosh, it's super low. And when you're talking about misconduct, I mean, it's a wide variety, but I will tell you the one thing that is really big is honesty or truthfulness. And I will tell you, at least as a profession, that's probably the one thing that sinks more officers than anything else. And in my time here, I'm trying to think. There's only a couple, like the DUI that the chief gave an example of is one, but truthfulness is almost exclusively all the rest, where someone ends up getting terminated. So it's a very low percentage. I mean, we don't see it very often. I mean, I don't know, once every couple of years, it seems like and that's probably even more, that probably doesn't even happen that often, right, Chief? I mean, it's less than that. It's a very low percentage.
So this April, I'll have 5 years, and we've had 3 of those severe employment actions since I've been here.
Yeah,
And
so
again,
that's.
I'm just saying that that's good to know, and I think that one of the reasons I'm asking is because I've been asked that question by folks that I associate with, and my response has been similar, except I always add, I don't know. So it's best to kind of ask, but it is good to hear that we do have low numbers, because that does tell me that within the numbers that we have, the department is responding and taking I think an assertive role in saying this is not the type of officer that we want on our police force working with our community. So I certainly applaud that. And then again, I thank you for answering the questions, Commander.
You bet.
Okay, the chief has her hand up for a comment.
Yeah, and just a reminder, so again, under the law that just passed, when we have to report any economic sanctions, that database in DPSST, you can search by department. So any of you can put in Tigard Police Department. You'll see 2, because they didn't go retro back to, they have 2 pending. In fact, one is a Tigard one that'll be this month, and the other is not scheduled to go in front of a hearing for their decertification. It's not scheduled yet, but the individual that had the DUI, that isn't in that database. That was retro a couple of years. I think one of the legislative pieces that is floating around in the short session is they'd like to see that database go retro 30 years ago, which would mean to build up that database, which would put a huge impact, because DPSST can't do it without reaching out to all the agencies. And so I think there's a big workload that we're in opposition of, only from the sense of having everybody do that. So I don't know what kind of movement that's going to happen, but right now, certainly since the bill passed and moving forward, they add to the database. We'll see whether or not it goes retro or not.
And John, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you. Similar to Jimmy Brown question regarding terms of data, and I apologize if I didn't hear if you already mentioned it. But I'm just curious in terms of the number of discipline, how many of those are related to race, or do you even break it down to that category?
Yeah, we do. In fact, we're actually required by law to send in a report annually on bias-based policing. And so if we receive a complaint where someone perceives that it was based on race, we're required to document it as such. And so, for example, for 2021, we had one complaint that alleged race. And then, interestingly enough about that, and because I was the one that prepared the report for the chief, that one, that was their perception that the officers came to talk to them because of their race, but it was because they were witnesses. And once the sergeant had the opportunity to explain to them why the officers came over to talk to them, they understood it. And then they said that they wanted to withdraw their complaint. So the sergeant had brought them in to have a conversation with them, explain to them the incident and what had occurred, and that the officers were talking to them as witnesses. They wanted to withdraw the complaint. We still took the complaint, documented it, and then reported that to the state. So yeah, for example, in 2021, we had one of those. And so we do have a requirement to report that to the state. And it's based on the perception of the individual that's making the complaint too.
Thanks, Commander. That's great to hear.
You're welcome. And then one last thing really quickly, if I could, Sean. So in addition to the egregious complaints, right? We also take just as seriously those small ones, because if you let the little ones go, then they can become those big ones. For example, I had recently one where an officer didn't show up when they were scheduled to for an assignment, and they were disciplined for it because it impacted the efficient operation of the organization, right? Somebody else had to be called in to come and do their work. So as a result of them not showing up when they were supposed to, they were disciplined for it. So simple things like that, where we continue to make sure that we hold people accountable for the efficient operation of the organization, oftentimes can prevent those serious, more egregious situations from occurring. Chief, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think it's also important. It's not as clean as it sounds, or we make it sound, right, on what is a complaint and who should be notified. Last week, I had an opportunity to meet with a couple who was very frustrated with an investigation that we had. And they happened to bring it up to communities for community engagement, and brought to the attention of our city liaison, and it just happened to be that Councilor Newton sat on that committee as well. And so I was given an opportunity to meet with them and discuss it, and to kind of peel it back. The complaint was brought forward by somebody who witnessed this incident and had an encounter with one of the officers who was investigating this potential traffic incident. And so, because she had received a citation in the past, she believed this officer was not the best officer that could handle this. And so her complaint was, hey, I'd really want to see you guys hand it off to somebody else. The parents, we were handling through the investigatory process. And so when they didn't hear anything back, we were communicating with the complainant. We weren't communicating with the parents because we were done with the investigation. But we needed to kind of peel back and understand, one, their their frustration in how we handled it at the scene at the time, how we investigated afterwards, and what they perceived to be no communication, even though on scene they said they didn't want anything to be done. So none of this is as easy as it all appears. So when we say we do this and this is how it happens and stuff like that, there's still an opportunity to have miscommunication or expectations not met. And what I told this family, because it had to do with a 2-year-old child. So you can imagine the emotion of a child almost getting run over by a car. And being heard, being allowed to have those emotions, and then explaining where the process is and then explaining where we could do better. Hopefully they appreciated it, and we had to spend some extra time. So we can always do better. We try and do better, but we have processes in place, but it's still not seamless as we'd like it to be. So I just don't want to come across as we are absolutely perfect and, we're the gold standard. There are times where there are things we still miss, or just don't meet somebody's expectation because they had something else in mind that we didn't anticipate.
Thank you, Chief. Commander McDonald, did you have anything else? Okay.
No, sir. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Now I will turn it over to Kim to lead the discussion on the proposed recommendation for the professional standards sergeant and the ombudsman. I have a terrible time with that word, recommendation discussion.
I'm with you, Sean. I'm gonna have a really tough time saying that. Hopefully by the end of the night, we'll all be real good at it. Is a bright spot. So tonight we will go into breakout rooms, discuss the ombudsman position, as well as the professional sergeant's position. Jimmy and Co had created that recommendation for the group. And just before we get in there, I want to offer a little more information around what currently exists in the city. We spent a lot of time talking about what exists within the police department, but when we talk about this ombudsman position that will affect the entire city, I think it'll be good for this group and folks who have different levels of familiarity with Tigard city government to know what exists both as an external communications point of view, as well as what exists as far as checks and balances within the city to do investigations on individual roles. So I'm just going to go through this real quickly, and I invite any of the city folks who are more familiar with these positions to offer any clarifying comments or to answer any questions that come up. So if everybody can see my screen. So some areas where we see external communications within the city come a lot from the elected officials. They are charged with going out into the community, hearing community, connecting the community with services that the city provides. City manager's office receives inquiries. They can act as a connector between folks in the city and the city services, similar to how elected officials. There's a city communications team that has the role of pushing information out, but also looking for ways to take information in. There's also public information officers. I think we've met Kelsey Anderson. If you haven't, she's the public information officer with the police department. Other departments also have PIOs. We have boards and committees like this one. So there's 11 others in addition to public safety that all have their specific charges, including a community engagement committee that the chief referenced earlier. And then finally, there's community engagement program coordinators that have roles in 3 of the city departments. So any questions about what currently exists when we talk about external communications for the city? Yeah, Valerie.
So what ties this all together? Is there a individual or an office that helps facilitate city communication overall? Because it sounds like there are lots of individuals sort of, working on messaging, but how do we make sure that's coherent as between the different city, boards or city groups?
Yeah, conveniently, we have an assistant city manager on the call who just raised her hand. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy Nyland.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, happy Valentine's Day. I'm sure we were all planning to have a lovely Valentine's celebration at a meeting. So Valerie, that's a great question. When I got to Tigard 3 years ago, I noticed that we have a plethora of ways to communicate and contact the city. And sometimes it's overwhelming because people don't know which channel goes to which person. So we are streamlining that and have started having weekly meetings where all the PIOs and the communications team meets to connect dots. And we are also in progress is creating a citywide strategic communications plan that also touches upon outreach and engagement. So our idea is to really streamline those channels. So there is eventually one place to call, one place to contact, one person to communicate with, who's really the air traffic controller. So
Kathy, what steps is that process taking to address concerns related to disparate racial impact? Because I know the city is certainly getting much more diverse and has gotten much more diverse since I moved here 20 years ago or so.
That is also a really great question. Is one of the components of the citywide communications plan is having that inclusive lens, because not all outreach tools work for different demographics.
Right.
So it's really getting a better understanding of the community and how people want to receive information. A survey is going to work great for some people who have access, but an in-person meeting is going to work for other people. And having interpretation and translation available is also something that we're really working on within the city. So having that equity lens will definitely be threaded through all of our communication and outreach and engagement tools that we deploy.
So Kathy, is there an idea, because you talked about, coordinating, which I think is really important. And then is there the idea that the single point of entry would also serve as an advocate for the public with these different organizations or within these different branches?
As we develop the citywide strategic plan, we have a number of like community and coordinators who do outreach and engagement. It's really getting everyone on the same page that they also serve as advocates for the community, help navigate a system. I know I've worked in government for 12 years and I started because I had issues with the city. So I was constantly going to meetings, raising my hand, and they finally said, "You're hired." So I totally get it. And that's my big work plan this year, is to make it easier. And the staff that we have are all navigators and advocates for community. Everyone who works for the city of Tigard is in some sense an advocate for community, because community is why we're here.
Great, thank you, Kathy.
Sure.
And Jimmy, I see your hand.
So let me unmute, let me lower my hand. And so, and I'm assuming we're also going to get into our breakout room, so we could probably have more discussion about this. But what I've seen, what was placed up on the board for all of us to see, indicates that there is an internal mechanism that is inside of the city that promotes outreach and engagement activities, which is very, very good. My sense, and really one of the reasons why we brought up the discussion of having an ombudsperson, is that the efforts that we see thus far really focus on the internal mechanisms of the city of Tigard. The ombudsman position by design is oriented from a community-based focus, looking into the city and working inside the city. That is different than the existing internal processes that exist. And at the same time, it also can dovetail into those activities inside of the city. I know that we mentioned in our last meeting that there is position being shopped around, and that position again would be focusing on diversity and inclusion. Again, a wonderful process, but that's an internal mechanism inside of the city that's really not particularly centered, at least from what I've heard thus far, that's not particularly centered on how does the community get to be on a same level as those activities inside and focused inside the city. So that's what the concept of the ombudsman position would really focus on, is ensuring that, that the work that's being done or connected to the city would be on the same level, not kind of a top down, and I don't mean any negative value about that, but not from a top down type of perspective, but one that is equal in focus and access to those internal mechanisms.
Thank you, Jimmy. And we will have much more time and discussion inside the breakout rooms about the ombudsman position and its focus. And Sean, last question.
Thanks, Kim. Question for the city. What resources do we have right now for interpreters? I know that I can call the city and get a call back if there's an issue I'm concerned about. What if I'm a Spanish speaker, or I speak Chinese or Vietnamese? What interpreter resources are available, or are there any?
Commander, please.
So it will depend on the department or maybe the person that you get on the phone, Sean, but oftentimes you'll have more of our city departments are having at least Spanish speakers, but we also have access to language line and things like that, so we can get assistance with at least interpretation. You may not actually have somebody that is there to speak the actual, the specific language that's a city staff member, but we have the resource to get to that, so that we can have somebody that can listen and then explain to the staff member and to the community member what it is that the person's looking for. So that's available. But most city departments, and more were at least Spanish speakers in some of more of our public facing desks and things like that. And then there are some other languages represented within the city as well. I think we early on we talked about some of the different languages that were represented here in the police department, and we have someone that speaks Russian, we have Korean, Japanese, oh my gosh, I think Vietnamese as well. So we have and Spanish. Did I say German? I think we have German as well. So anyway, there's a variety, and it's going to depend on which desk you go to, but we have those resources. We contract through a language interpretation service that we can use.
Okay, great. Thank you, Commander.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And so the second portion of the ombudsman position, as part of how I read sorry, Jimmy, did you have a question?
I did. For background, I'm just going through my prior 38 some odd years of public service, and especially around the issue of language services. So historically, when language services have been utilized, organizations will go inside the organization and say to, we'll say a Spanish-speaking staff person or a Vietnamese, one of the Vietnamese languages, one of those staff people, and say, hey, I need you to interpret this information for me. Can you translate this information? Can you come speak to this individual for me? All well and good. But my question is, and one of the things that I know I had to deal with in my past was, are we providing any type of financial resources for those skill sets? Because quite frankly, it's I think it adds a sense of, yes, I'm here, yes, I speak Spanish, you want that service, but you're not going to pay me for that service. Granted, the language line exists, and obviously there's probably a contract between the city and some of those places that provide those language services. But I'm thinking of it from the perspective of an employee who has that second language skill or primary language skill, and whether or not they are being compensated for having that skill, as opposed to, hey, let's just go talk to whoever that has that skill set. So just a thought.
Commander,
Question.
please.
In short, yes, they are being compensated. I'm not sure. I know that the TPOA, the police union, has that provision in their contract. I'm not sure about SEIU, the other union in the city, but yes, we do have two different levels of compensation for foreign language proficiency. And it isn't just for Spanish. It's for any language proficiency. And it's not determined by the PD. It's determined by human resources. They have a testing service that tests for that proficiency.
Thank you, Commander. And Judge, please.
There we go. Apologize for being late. I had to connect finally through my phone. I just want to add that in court, when we hire, there were two positions we hired for in the last year or so, if I remember correctly, and they were for bilingual court clerks, and they were specifically advertised for that purpose, and additional compensation was permitted for that.
Thank you, Judge. So the second portion of the ombudsman position was to provide some oversight, to look into departments. And so I wanted to go through just quickly some of the checks and balances that do currently exist, not just within the police department, which we've spent some time talking about, but also within the greater city government. Again, elected officials, this is quite a bit of their charge, is oversight on city departments, boards and committees, like the PSAB, as well as the 11 others, some of whom are specialized for departments. The department heads provide that, as well as professional accreditation services. So we've talked a lot about DPSST, also the state bar for folks like Shelby, and a CE that does professional engineering accreditations. There are financial audits, human resources, state and federal agencies provide oversight into city governments. The unions, we've talked about the police complaint process. The media provides a check and an oversight role in city government. The new professional standards sergeant, and performance evaluations at the individual employee level. So, any questions around the checks and balances that currently exist within the city? Great. So moving on, so for discussion, those are services that currently exist. I think Jimmy's already started answering this question in his response, but is based on your lived experiences, based on firsthand accounts of people you know, what gaps exist in the city's current external communications and internal checks and balances systems that you would like to see addressed in this ombudsman position or in a different configuration. So I'd like to really talk about this in real terms, how folks are seeing these interactions with the city play out with yourself, with people you know. I think Tammy and I are going to push a little bit for that lived experience conversation today. With that, I'm just going to send everyone into the breakout rooms, and I'll see you in a little bit.
Michael O'Brien.
Joined the meeting.
Oh no, it's my group that's still in the breakout.
Yeah, are we waiting for the other group to?
We shouldn't be. We concluded. They're going off the rails without a facilitator. Who knows what they'll come back with now? All right, welcome back, everybody. I know our group had just a fantastic conversation. I hope you did as well. In the interest of time, because we do want to make sure we touch on the no knock warrant issue as well, the chief. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the topic that my group spent a lot of our time with, and even some revised language to the recommendation. Invite Tammy to do the same, invite group members to add in anything that's missed. We'll also send out some information and notes from both groups in the coming week, because we won't have enough time to really break that down tonight. And then we'll move on to the current events topic and close out our evening. So our group spent a lot of time talking about what the position's kind of aspirations would be, and some points that came up quite a bit were this idea of being a navigator for complex city systems, as well as an advocate on behalf of individuals. And this ombudsman position being externally facing, a focal point for community members to come to, and then to help advocate the system. We hear a lot of great stories about times where Liz was able to help people navigate that system, as well as other folks who have either gotten help navigating or needed help or been able to help others. And so there was this need, this gap that was identified. We also talked about how the word ombudsman was difficult for everyone to pronounce, and also wasn't necessarily accessible to folks in the community just hearing about this ombudsman position. And we had a little bit of conversation around the difference between concept and implementation, and how this is still very much a conceptual idea, and kind of keeping it in that space and then leaving it to the city to work on the implementation phase. And we did work on the recommendation a little bit towards the end, based on the conversation, renamed it a community-centered citywide position, and talked about creating a position focused on assisting community members navigate the government systems with Tigard, and then advocating on their behalf. Position will act as an external window to the city government and as a connection point for community members. Position will help ensure that communities of color are afforded equity, justice, transparency, accountability, keeping some of that original language. And then we removed that funding request as being part of like more of the implementation rather than the concept. Anything that I missed? Group A. Great. So Tammy, would you like to talk about group 1? Will be
Sure. And we did not do anything with the change of the language. We had a really great conversation about the cultural competencies for this position, and that really it needed to be able to address that, and that was very important to everybody. And it needed to be kind of there was an option to have a middle step between this position and the DEI coordinator, or the DEI position that we talked about before. Talked about that this was kind of a long-term position as well, that maybe it wasn't something that happened right now. We didn't get into a lot of the budget discussion that you had talked about. And really just looking at it from that cultural competency lens was a big part of it. And Valerie has her hand up as well.
Yeah, I think that is a really good summary of a lot of the issues that we talked about. I think the proposal of a middle step is really that, an ombudsman may be in Tigard's future to address citywide issues. But to the extent that, I like the revisions that your group made to the language. I think that's really positive, and I think that it addresses a lot of the concerns that we had. And one thing that we had just talked about, that Justin had really been the genesis of, the idea that, there may be a role for a standing board to address these issues and to help provide navigational tools within the city of Tigard and help get people to the right place. And whether that's subsumed within one of the existing committees or not, I think is a point for further discussion. But, you know, in addition to cultural competency, I think one of the things that we need to be aware of, it's not just how do you talk to communities of color. I think it's an awareness of multi-generational trauma and a lot of the issues that the communities have endured and that we have endured. You know, that we have family members who, you know, were interned. We have family members that came over, you know, under very horrible circumstances from, you know, Southeast Asia, that we have family members who've come from South America, you know, and, you know, different backgrounds and the different backgrounds that we have related to government and policing are always going to inform our interactions with those. And so to the extent that, you know, there is that we sort of retool the description, and like I said, I like the language that your group incorporated with the existing recommendation, and whether that's, you know, folded into the DEI coordinator position, or if it, you know, as part of that's transferred to the work of a board. You know, I think it is incumbent on us to try and meet people where they are. And, you know, that has to do, and that relates to, you know, how they may or may not feel comfortable interacting with government. Because the last thing that we want to do is have incidents within our community that we don't know about, right? I mean, a big part of the challenge of policing, at least that I have worked with all of you for a long, you know, several months now, a big part of the challenge is that you can't fix a problem you don't know exists. And you can't put systems in place to help a department or to help a community heal if you don't know what's going on. So how do you create those open doors? So I think, you know, adding that to what Tammy had suggested, I think encapsulates my understanding of our conversation. That, you know, I think I would love to see an additional moving this forward with the citywide position, you know, that we would maybe see that job description when it becomes available, and make sure that it addresses some of the concerns that we have raised in, you know, in these discussions. Part of the reason why we raised it in the context of the internal affairs position is that, you know, the internal affairs position is inherently going to be fixing things, right, and addressing issues within the department. And I guess our concern was that there needs to be public-facing aspect to that as well. And so that may fall within the mandate of the position that's already being proposed. And so, you know, my suggestion would be that we adopt the language, Kim, that you had put together as our aspirational statement for moving this ball forward, and then, you know, have further discussions down the road as something becomes more solid around that definition.
Are you making a motion to vote on the language?
I don't know that we need to tonight. I mean, I think that's something that we could even do.
We don't. I was just offering you that
Yeah.
option based on your comment.
I mean, I would be happy to vote on it, but I'd also be happy to wait if people need to digest, because we've had a lot of, at least our discussion was fairly intense. And so people may need some time to recover from that.
Absolutely. And I will send out the draft language as well, so you all have time to review.
Just to remind us of time's getting short. We have a few topics. I would move that we postpone the vote to the next meeting.
Absolutely. So I know the chief wanted to address no knock warrants in Tigard. That'll be our last topic for the evening.
Yeah, I thought it was appropriate under current events because on February 2nd, if some of you are aware, in Minneapolis, they executed a no-knock warrant for a homicide suspect, encountered a black male wrapped up in a blanket on a couch who presented a firearm and ended up shooting him. And it all stems from the question of no knock. So I did have some correspondence with some of our community members. So I thought this was a great time to share with all of you that in Oregon, we aren't allowed to do no knock warrants. And specifically, just so it's on the record, ORS 133.575, number 2, the executing officer shall, before entering the premises, give appropriate notice of the identity, the authority, and the purpose of the officer to the person to be searched or to the person in apparent control of the premises to be searched, as the case may be. So again, this was all part of the 8 can't wait, and we explained that early on. But since it's come up again in another state, just another opportunity, should people ask you and anybody listening in, just to remind people that in Oregon, we do not have the no knock warrant capabilities, nor would we advocate for it.
That's great. Thank you, Chief.
Sean, do you want me to do next steps?
Yes, Kim. Yes, please do.
Thanks. So next meeting, we will conclude our conversation around complaints and discipline. You will all see the materials get circulated this week. And we will be moving on, selecting a new chair and vice chair. And I think our next topic might be school resource officers, which we'll also schedule for next week, because it doesn't seem like the conclusion of this topic is going to take the entire meeting time. Is that right, Jamie? Am I remembering that right? I put down my PowerPoint already. And with that, happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Happy Valentine's Day. And if anybody wants to watch something really cool, if you didn't catch the Super Bowl, I would encourage you to watch the halftime show. Absolutely incredible. So if you haven't seen that, it's worth watching. With that,
actually, I have at one point, today is Oregon's 163rd birthday. Happy birthday, Oregon.
Happy birthday, Oregon.
Happy birthday, Oregon. Thank you, Patty. Okay, with that, I'd like
the chief. One more thing.
One other thing, again, chat with the chief February 22nd. Patty and Jimmy are going to join me. So again, a way for them to connect with anybody calling in. So thank you both for volunteering to do that. So again, February 22nd, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. chat with the chief.
We'll send out that in an email as well.
Okay. And with that, I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion or opposition? Okay. Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.
Night,
everyone.